This is the video over the reproductive system, and this picture shows the function of the reproductive system. It's to make babies. We're going to start first with the male reproductive system, which consists of the gonads, which produce the gametes or the sex cells and the hormones, and then there are other accessory organs and glands, and then the external genitalia. Testes are the male gonads. They produce sperm and testosterone. The ductus deferens is this tube right here. The ductus deferens transports sperm from the epididymis to the prostate gland. Back here we have the seminal glands. They secrete most of the volume of semen. And then below that is the prostate gland. The prostate gland secretes fluid and enzymes. And down here we have the bulbourethral gland, which secretes fluids, actually mostly mucus, that lubricates the tip of the penis. Then we have the urethra here running through the penis. The urethra transports semen to the exterior. The epididymis here is the site of sperm maturation. The penis here contains erectile tissue. It deposits sperm in the vagina and produces pleasurable sensations during sexual activities. And here is the scrotum, which holds the testes outside the body. The sperm are produced in the seminiferous tubules. So this is a cross-section through the testes. So this is looking at the inside of the testes, and you'll see these seminiferous tubules. So the sperm are produced here in the seminiferous tubules, and then they'll travel back here to the epididymis. And then to the ductus. So here's where they're produced, inside the testes in the seminiferous tubules, and they travel to the epididymis, then the ductus deferens, and then right in here we have the ejaculatory duct, and then through the urethra. The testes start development inside the body cavity, but they descend through the abdominal muscles and into the scrotum before birth. The ductus deferens here, it travels through the inguinal ring and the inguinal canal. It has to get through these muscle layers into the abdominal cavity, and this is the site of inguinal hernias because there is a slight weak spot in these muscles, and that's where a common site of hernias. The cremaster muscle here pulls the testes closer to the body. It helps to regulate the temperature. The testes are located outside the body because sperm development needs to take place at a lower temperature than we have inside our bodies. But they don't want to get too cold, so if it's cold outside, the cremaster muscle will contract and bring the testes closer to the body to keep them warm. If it's hot outside, it will relax and let the testes hang down lower from the body. The dartos muscle is right in here. It will also elevate the testes. So sperm is produced here in the seminiferous tubules. It will travel through what's called the rete testes right here, and then through these efferent ductules right in here to the epididymis. Each seminiferous tubule is about 80 centimeters long, and a typical testes contains about a half mile of seminiferous tubules. So that means if you have two testes, a male has a mile of seminiferous tubules. Spermatogenesis, or sperm production, involves mitosis, as we see here, and meiosis, and then a third process called spermiogenesis. to get to a mature spermatozoa. And here's a good diagram of the process. A spermatogonia, which are the male stem cells, a spermatogonia will go through mitosis to produce a primary spermatocyte. And then it's going to divide and produce a primary spermatocyte, and the other cell is going to remain as a stem cell, a spermatogonium. The primary spermatocyte is going to go through meiosis 1 to produce 2 secondary spermatocytes, each containing 23 pairs of chromosomes. So that's the normal chromosome number that most of our body cells have. Then the secondary spermatocytes go through meiosis 2 to produce 2 spermatids with 23 chromosomes. So these cells have half the usual number of chromosomes as the rest of our body cells. And then the last step is spermiogenesis, which is the physical maturation of a spermatid into a mature spermatozoa. So it goes from a ball into something with a head and a tail, and we're going to talk next about the parts of a spermatozoa. So at the tip it has what's called an acrosomal cap. It contains enzymes that will help penetrate the protective coating around a secondary oocyte. The head contains densely packed chromosomes, which is the DNA. The middle piece here contains many mitochondria, which is going to provide the energy required to move the tail. So this is sort of like the motor. And then the tail is a flagellum that will propel the sperm, so it's like the propeller. And if we look at a close-up of the testes, here's an actual seminiferous tubule. And if we look even closer, here's what one would look like, and here's a diagram of it so we can see what's going on. The sperm develop inside the seminiferous tubules. And in between the tubules there are interstitial cells, which we can see right here. These are the cells that produce testosterone. Looking at just one section of a seminiferous tubule now, we can see the nurse cells. The nurse cells make up the seminiferous tubules. They also form the blood-testes barrier, which is right around here. And they help with spermatogenesis. Sperm are not fully functional until they go through the process of capacitation. They have to be mixed with the secretions of the seminal glands, and they must be exposed to conditions in the female reproductive tract. And this keeps the sperm have some very powerful enzymes in their acrosomal cap, and we don't want to release those inside the male body. It might break down things. So this shows the epididymis. Sperm complete their functional maturation in the epididymis. It's a coiled tube that's about 7 meters long. So if you count all the coils, it's 7 meters, and then it goes to the ductus deferens. The ductus deferens is about 40 centimeters long. It's not coiled though. It travels through the spermatic cord, which is holding the testes in place, through the inguinal canal, through the abdominal muscles, and into the abdomen, and then into the prostate gland. In this figure, we're looking at the structures from behind, and we can see here the seminal gland, which produces 60% of the volume of semen. And the sperm start moving when their tails are exposed to the seminal fluid. That's part of the capacitation process. So here's the ductus deferens bringing in the sperm, and then they mix right in here. Right here is the prostate gland, which produces 25% of the volume of semen. And then down here we have the bulbourethral glands. They're at the base of the penis. they produce a thick alkaline mucus. This cleans out the urethra and also lubricates the tip of the penis. The penis contains the urethra, which transports semen and urine to the exterior. And if we look at a cross-section, this is a cross-section of the penis, you can see there are two major parts, the corpora cavernosa and the corpus spongiosum. These are erectile tissue in the penis. It's a modified muscle. Basically, it just fills up with blood. And this shows how everything is connected. So again, the sperm are produced in the seminiferous tubules of the testes, move to the epididymis, then they'll travel through the ductus deferens, and then they'll mix with the fluid from the seminal gland and the prostate gland, and then go out through the urethra. And also there's the bulbourethral glands. Their secretions actually come first. Alright, we're going to talk about the phases of male sexual activity. The first phase is called arousal. During arousal, erotic thoughts or stimulation of sensory nerves in the genital region leads to an increase in parasympathetic outflow in the pelvic nerves. Nitric oxide is released, which relaxes smooth muscle and causes the penile arteries to dilate and leads to an erection. Arousal also stimulates the bulbourethral glands to release their secretions. Further stimulation causes emission. In this phase, contractions in the ductus deferens push sperm into the urethra. Contractions in the seminal glands and the prostate glands push their secretions into the urethra. And then the last phase is ejaculation. Powerful rhythmic contractions of the ischiocavernosus and the bulbocavernosus muscles cause ejaculation, which pushes the semen out. And here are those muscles, the ischiocavernosus and the bulbocavernosus. In males, the hypothalamus secretes GnRH at a relatively steady rate throughout a man's reproductive life. GnRH then goes to the pituitary gland, causes the secretion of LH and FSH. LH stimulates the interstitial cells of the testes to produce testosterone, which maintains the libido, stimulates bone and muscle growth, and causes secondary sex characteristics, and it maintains the accessory glands and organs of the male reproductive system. FSH stimulates spermatogenesis and spermiogenesis. And we can see that testosterone levels are regulated by negative feedback. So when testosterone is produced, it goes back to the hypothalamus, tells it to stop making GnRH. And one thing with FSH, it stimulates nerve cells and they produce inhibin, and then the inhibin goes back to the pituitary gland and inhibits the release of FSH. So all these hormones are balanced by negative feedback. Now we're going to look at the female reproductive system. The ovaries are the female gonads, and they produce oocytes and hormones. And here is looking at a cross-section of these organs. We can see there's the ovary. Here is the uterus. The uterus is the site of embryonic and fetal development. The uterine tubes, they will deliver an oocyte or embryo to the uterus. They're also the normal site of fertilization, so an egg will be released from the ovary and travel through the uterine tube here to the uterus. That's where development will happen. We can see right here is the vagina. Vagina is the organ of intercourse, the site for sperm deposition, and it acts as the birth canal. It also provides a passageway for fluids during menstruation. Here we can see the clitoris. The clitoris contains erectile tissue. It actually develops from the same tissue as the penis in males, and it produces pleasurable sensations during sexual activities. The labia, we can see here, labia majora and labia minora, they contain glands, and we can see those glands right here, that lubricate the entrance to the vagina. The ovaries, the uterine tubes, and the uterus are enclosed in a mesentery called the broad ligament. The ovaries, we can see we don't want the ovaries to go anywhere. They're also held in place by the suspensory, and here's the suspensory ligament, and here's the ovarian ligament, and by what's called the mesovarium right here, which attaches them to the broad ligament. Alright, oogenesis or ovum production is similar to spermatogenesis. In meiosis, one secondary oocyte is produced along with a polar body, which is just extra DNA. Meiosis 1 begins in fetal development and pauses at birth, and when the female reaches puberty, some of the primary oocytes are stimulated to begin meiosis 2. And meiosis 2 is only completed if fertilization occurs. This is the ovarian cycle. The ovarian cycle produces secondary oocytes that are ovulated. So it starts with a primordial follicle, and remember this happens actually before birth. They consist of a single layer of follicle cells surrounding a primary oocyte, and when stimulated by FSH, the follicle cells enlarge and form several layers of granulosa cells, and the zona pellucida and thecal cells develop around the oocyte, and then this is called a primary follicle. The granulosa and thecal cells produce estrogens. Secondary follicles develop as the follicle thickens and follicular cells secrete fluid. Usually only one secondary follicle is going to develop into a tertiary or a mature follicle. The granulosa cells perform a protective layer known as the corona radiata. There will be an LH surge, which causes the tertiary follicle to release the secondary oocyte into the pelvic cavity. This is called ovulation. The remaining granulosa cells are going to form the corpus luteum, which makes progesterone. That progesterone stimulates the maturation of the uterine lining and secretion by the uterine glands, preparing it to receive an embryo. If fertilization does not occur, the corpus luteum degenerates into a corpus albicans, and progesterone and estrogen levels fall. The uterus is a hollow organ with thick muscular walls with 3 layers. The outer layer is called the perimetrium. The middle layer is a thick layer of smooth muscle called the myometrium, and then the inner layer is the endometrium. We're going to look closer at the endometrium. So here is the perimetrium, myometrium, and endometrium. The endometrium contains what's called a basilar layer or a basilar zone, and then a functional zone. So the basilar zone is closest to the myometrium, and the functional zone is further away from it, so it's the most inside layer. This functional zone contains spiral arteries, as you can see here, and also these uterine glands. During menses, the functional layer, this shows the functional layer, how it changes during the uterine cycle. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So during menses, these spiral arteries constrict. That reduces blood flow into the functional zone. Then this tissue out here dies, And then the artery walls rupture and blood rushes into the functional zone and it takes the dead tissue with it. And this is what causes menstruation. During the proliferative phase, so this shows the different phases. Here's menses, where it's basically dying. The functional zone is being flushed away. During the proliferative phase, the functional zone is being rebuilt. And then during the secretory phase, the uterine glands enlarge and secrete glycogen that can be used by the developing embryo. So this is when it's getting ready to receive an embryo. The mammary glands nourish the infant after delivery. The ovarian and uterine cycles are regulated by hormones of the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and ovaries. So from the hypothalamus, we release GnRH. GnRH released from the hypothalamus causes the production of FSH and LH and the secretion of FSH. In the follicular phase of the ovarian cycle, FSH is released. This causes follicle development and secretion of estrogens. These estrogens stimulate bone and muscle growth, cause female secondary sex characteristics to appear, and they maintain accessory glands and organs. And so that's the first phase we're talking about. FSH is being released, and that's going to cause the increase in the release of estrogen. And then as these estrogen levels rise, that's going to cause LH to be secreted. Here's LH. This causes completion of meiosis 1 by the primary oocyte. It also causes ovulation and formation of the corpus luteum. And we can see here the progesterone levels are going to rise because the corpus luteum produces them. This causes the growth of the functional layer of the endometrium. And we can see here the basal body temperature is higher during the luteal phase, so right after ovulation. So if you want to predict ovulation, you can measure your basal body temperature, and it does jump after you ovulate. Alright, kids are great, but we need to talk about birth control. Kids are great when you're ready for them. This is a condom. Condoms keep sperm from reaching the vagina and also protect against STDs. This is a diaphragm. They're inserted into the vagina, covering the cervix and blocking sperm entry. They are used with spermicide to kill sperm. Oral contraceptives, which are basically estrogen and progesterone, these are over 99% effective when they're taken as prescribed, but they do not protect against STDs. And what these do is they make your body actually think that you're pregnant so that you won't ovulate. This is the progesterone only pill. It's another birth control pill. And now we have these Depo-Provera shots. These are other options. You have to get the shots every 3 months. Another method is the IUD, intrauterine device. These keep fertilized embryos from implanting in the uterus. The rhythm method involves abstaining from intercourse on the days ovulation might be occurring, so you can measure your temperature and know when ovulation is happening, and as long as you don't have intercourse near that time, you shouldn't get pregnant. This is the Plan B pill, postcoital contraceptives. It's 2 large doses of estrogen and progesterone, which can be taken after unprotected intercourse, and it will cause that. If an ovum was fertilized, it will keep it from implanting in the uterus. Surgical sterilization In males, you cut the ductus deferens, so they actually still produce sperm, but the sperm can't get out. And most of the volume of semen actually comes from the seminal glands and the prostate glands. So that's a very effective method. In female sterilization involves cutting the uterine tube so that way the ovaries can't get here, so fertilization can never happen. Some reproductive system disorders. This is a diagram of BPH, which stands for benign prostatic hypertrophy. It occurs generally as men get older. Sometimes the interstitial cells will stop producing testosterone and start producing estrogen, which will stimulate the prostate to grow. That constricts or blocks the urethra, and then you can't pee, and that's no fun. Prostate cancer is the second most common cancer. Testicular cancer can occur when spermatogonia divide out of control, so they're already dividing rapidly. Lance Armstrong survived that. In females, here's a picture of a tumor in a breast. Breast cancer is the most common type of cancer in women. This shows ovarian cancer, and also cervical cancer can happen. Most cervical cancers are caused by the HPV virus. So now we have a shot for that, a vaccine called Gardasil. Gardasil protects against the most common strains of cervical cancer, but there are 100 different strains of cervical cancer, and Gardasil only protects you from 4. And now it's being blamed for infertility and other problems.